Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
Great Scott! There's no crying in baseball!
You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey.
This is where the fun begins.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That's right, we're ranking The Goonies. The Goonies is a 1985 American adventure comedy film where a group of misfit kids embark on a thrilling adventure to find a pirate's treasure while evading a family of criminals trying to stop them. Now I've got to admit, I have a huge bias here. This is a movie, one of many that I would watch as a kid. It is one of my dad's favorite movies. It's one of the movies that he showed me that he loves and I loved watching as a kid. So there's gonna be some bias here. I'll do my best to analyze the movie as much as possible without a whole lot of bias, but that's just the way it is. That's why we love movies. We'll love movies that maybe aren't that great, but they just have a special attachment. That's what makes them so amazing. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it with the 10 essential aspects of a movie. First is plot. Does the movie follow a comprehensive story arc and is plausible within the world that has been created? This is the all-time, one of the classic plots, the group of kids summer adventure, whether it's the last hurrah or just the big adventure of the year. I don't know if this is actually the first one to do that, so please drop a comment below if you know the answer to that, whether this is the first summer adventure kid group movie. But I mean, it's known as an 80s kind of thing, but it's gone on to now. Stranger Things is completely based on this kind of plot of just the 80s summer adventure. And I love it. Everyone loves it for a reason. It's gone on for a long time. It's great. These cast of kids was great. I really enjoy it. It's simple, but I think what has led this story to be kind of memorable is the treasure aspect, the one-eyed Willie treasure. It's just such a simple story, but it's told well. It's just a nice, fun story to sit down and watch and be a part of. Second is attraction. Does the movie have an interesting premise with a high entertainment value? If you love 80s movies, you're gonna love this movie. It is what it is. It's a classic 80s movies. If you have not watched many classic 80s movies, I would recommend watching them. And this is actually, I don't know if I would suggest this one first because it does have its points where it is a little rough to watch, but it is a classic for a reason. If you've had any interest in any 80s movies that are classics that you haven't seen, I would recommend watching this one. It is a good one. There's a couple others I would recommend first, but this isn't bad. I mean, this movie is beloved for a reason. Third is theme. What message or truth is the movie trying to convey? Now, this movie being about a group of kids, obviously a lot of what those themes are going to be in those kind of movies is the power of friendship. It's all about friendship. It's about sticking together, what you can do when you are together and you trust in one another. But I think a huge theme of this movie is actually cherishing this childhood wonder. You kind of start the movie and it's just everyone's kind of on the same idea about the ridiculousness of finding hidden treasure. It just doesn't seem all that plausible. But in this movie, they kind of just go with it. I mean, you have the main character that always believes in it, but everyone else just kind of goes, fine, let's roll with it and see where it goes. And then they kind of get in predicaments that force them to keep going. But it's also about having and keeping that childhood wonder for something like finding buried treasure. There's something innocent and fun about that. In this movie, it is kind of the hinge point in their lives where things are going to change, and this is where their childhood is going to start to come to an end. And I think that this movie is that representation of holding on to what's so pure and innocent and fun about being a child. It's a fun thing to watch and it makes you think about when you were a kid, if you had any friends like this. I feel like they're stereotyped for a reason, for people to kind of be able to recognize within themselves their own old childhood wonder and creative imagination. Fourth is dialogue. Is there a real feel to the conversation? This is where the movie can be rough. You kind of forget about it. You don't really recognize it when you're young. Going back on it, watching it older, watching it with more of an eye, there's a lot of dialogue that you can tell it doesn't make sense in the movie and would probably make sense with more context. This seems like a movie that had a lot more scenes, a lot more to the plot than what was actually presented to you. Seems like it had editing problems because there are definitely there's just the 80s dialogue, which the quality of movies was just not as high as well. The dialogue's not as good, so you kind of have an expectation there. But even below that, this movie has just speeches and scenes where characters say things and you're like, what? Why? What are you saying? There's the whole like speech in the well that's supposed to be, this like motivator to keep going, and I feel like it doesn't make much sense at all, and it's not very motivational. The dialogue in this movie is honestly not that great looking at it on a keen eye, but the movie is kind of just a silly kids movie, so you gotta take the good with the bad here. But yeah, this is probably one of the roughest part of the movie. Fifth is acting. Are the characters convincing? Now, the only actor I wanted to point out here is John Mutzak. Hopefully I said that right. He died in 1989, but he does play Sloth in this movie, and I just think it's a combination of him with the character. The character is one of the most memorable characters in cinema. I feel like a lot of people who know 80s movies know about Sloth, they know about the Goonies, and I just love his character in this movie. I imagine he had some hand to play with that, a lot of the facial expressions and how he wanted to portray the character. I'm sure that was all him. I just think he does a good job, and obviously he's like a massive presence as a human being. As far as all the other actors and actresses go, I feel like they all have their moments where they're not great, and then they have moments where they fit right in where they need to be, but I don't know if they necessarily need to be pointed out. I mean, the kids group is a good casting of the kids group. They all do a good job of being that stereotype of having that one thing that defines them and keeps defining them throughout the entire movie. They do well together, but I don't think there's anything standing out. 6 is cinematography. Is there a creative use of lighting, setting, and wardrobe to convey emotion? Emotion aside, there is some creativity to this movie that I think has made it long lasting, and that is that story of One-Eyed Willie. That's what makes this movie really that interesting, is the story of One-Eyed Willie, but really all of the traps that he lays before his ship, and everything that goes on in the movie has that pirate theme. I liked it. I thought they did a good job with that. I think it's very simple but attractive. People like the story of finding treasure. People like the story of a pirate. People like Tomb Raiders. I mean, these are all things that people enjoy, and they're just present in this movie, and they do a good job. They're interesting enough. But as far as emotion goes, it's not a movie that was made for cinematography. It wasn't made to really get you emotional. You never honestly feel like any of these characters are at any danger of being harmed or killed in this movie at all, and that's not what it was going for. So there's no real moments that make you feel real emotional. It's just a feel good movie. It's a movie that you're supposed to watch, and you're not supposed to get that tense about it. You're just supposed to have a good time watching this story unfold. 7th is editing, and this is all about the pace of the movie. The movie is an hour and 54 minutes long. I always thought it was a decent runtime. It kind of goes a little long, but honestly, I can't gripe about it too much. But most of the time, I am ready for this movie to end when it is coming to the end. It probably could have been a little better, like an hour 40, 45. But again, this movie seems like it had 3 hours of content that had been edited and shoved together to make this 2-hour long movie, because there are several points that just don't quite make sense. They seem like they would have been used for not just this plot line but also another one, and it seems like they cut that out. So I feel like they did what they could to try to keep as most of the story as they can, but it came out a little choppy and probably could have even been a little shorter. Eighth is soundtrack. The movie itself doesn't really have really memorable music as far as just these grand scenes, but it has really, I feel like this has gone away in modern cinema. It's not really there that much, but they use music as little sounds when things are going on, when the story is progressing, when they discover something new about One-Eyed Willie, or when they discover about the story of One-Eyed Willie, or just when something is progressing in the plot. They have these little classic sounds that always play in your head, and I can hear it all the time when I go to watch this movie, when I think about this movie. Like if I hear that sound, I think about this movie, and I really enjoy it. I think it's something that's kind of been lost. I can't really think of a whole lot of movies that do that nowadays, but there are several 80s movies that do that, where they have these classic little sounds that deal when the plot is progressing. And when I hear those sounds, I cannot help but think of these movies. Ninth is directing. Now, I feel the director is in charge of the previous 8 aspects. They're the ones that have to put it all together, give it their stamp of approval, and make a good movie. Now, the director of this movie is Richard Donner, and unfortunately, Donner died in 2021, but up to the point of the Goonies, he had directed 9 total movies, and the 9 total movies were X-15, Salt and Pepper, Lola, The Omen, Superman, Inside Moves, The Toy, Lady Hawk, and finally, The Goonies. Now, I haven't seen majority of those movies, but I have seen a couple, and honestly, this movie is really on par with some of the other movies that he's made that I have seen, where there's aspects to it that are quality, that are good. The story is usually really good. I enjoy it, but there's those small problems like the dialogue or the editing that kind of keep it from being this amazing movie, but it's just good, and it gets carried by something like the plot. I think he was a good director. I think he did a good job with what he could do. Obviously, he's in a time where things were pretty limited, and you had to be pretty creative as a film director, and I feel like he did enough to warrant him being around. He obviously has a lot of classic films under his belt, and I think he has those for a reason. He had an eye to make some things unique, but I feel like he just did a good job of keeping movies entertaining, and having the main thing be the plot, be the most interesting. 10th is time. Will it stand the test of time? This movie is somehow 40 years old. That's kind of crazy to say, but people know about this movie. People love this movie, and I think it's totally warranted in some aspects. Watching it again, it kind of blows my mind that it got so popular, because it does have some of the problems that it has, but I feel like at its core, it's just a good entertainment, feel-good movie. It has stood the test of time for a reason. I think most people who have never watched this movie would watch it and feel like they had a good time. Now, whether it's super memorable, I don't know anymore. I feel like there are a lot of quality movies, but this is a movie that came out in a time where movies were being revolutionized. The 80s is what really brought movies into this next level, where more money was being made and put into them, and you started getting really serious movies that did really well rather than just well, and this is one of those that stood out. Now for the review section. Rotten Tomatoes critics gives it a 77, the audience gives it a 91, and IMDb gives it a 77. Now, my nostalgia wants me to really put this high, because I enjoy it. It's something that is from my past, from my childhood, that I love to watch. I will watch long into my life, I'm sure. But, I really understand the 77s. There's problems with this movie. I would really put it with nostalgia included, probably low B's to a mid B. It's probably where I would put that movie, but I think it's really warranted in that 77. It's got a good plot, it's got good aspects to it, but it does have its problems. It is dated, it doesn't look great all the time, but it does a good job with what it has. I thought it was creative, so I would personally probably put it in that between 80 and 85. Finally, for the rankings. For the year of 1985, it is the only movie I have done, so it's going to be first in entertainment and first in cinematography. For the decade of the 1980s, I've only done one other movie, and on the entertainment side, it is going to be first above Christine. Not that hard of a ranking, though I do have some bias and nostalgia towards Christine. It's not as much as the Goonies, and it's just not as quality of a movie. It's not as interesting. I have to kind of enjoy the cheesiness of Christine. You don't need to enjoy the cheesiness of the Goonies. There's not that much cheesiness there. It's just a good movie. It's a good plot. It's an interesting story. The characters are fun. There's just a lot more to it that is appealing than something like Christine. Now, cinematically, I have it first above Christine. And this one was actually a little bit harder for me, but there are a couple aspects to the Goonies that are better. I will say it's more wholesome. I tend to go towards things that are more wholesome rather than something like a horror movie, just because I feel like wholesome movies represent film a lot better than something that's just trying to scare you. Though Christine does have its parts where it does have character development, it does have some cinematography, some practical effects that I find interesting, that I enjoy watching when I watch the movie. The Goonies, just at its core, the plot is better, the characters are better, they are more interesting. It's not that hard, but I just feel like Christine kind of gets maybe too much rap for what it does bring to the table, but the Goonies is easily better. Now, all time, out of 52 total movies on the entertainment side, it is gonna be first above Redline. And honestly, that's probably a lot of the nostalgia talking. I just have a special place for this movie in my heart. Even watching it again, and seeing a lot more flaws than I really noticed before, it's just, I can name you every part of this movie. I can recite lines to this movie. I know all the characters. I know what happens in this movie without watching it for a decade. I can easily tell you what scene comes next. And to me, that's the sign of a great movie, a great entertainment movie especially. It's such an easy watch. It's a fun watch. It's a wholesome movie. Redline is new to me, but I also don't think it's as appealing, just genuinely, as a movie. I really enjoyed that movie. I thought that movie brings a lot to the table and is extremely interesting. I love it. It hits so many parts that I enjoy, but sometimes you can't beat the nostalgia and the bias. That's just the way it's gonna be. It's my list. I'll do what I want. Now, cinematically, out of 52 total movies, it is going to be 32nd, just below The Whole Nine Yards and above Treasure Island. And it's in that section of movies that is entertainment movies. That's what they're made for, and they don't really bring much to the table cinematically. The Goonies kind of does. I do think the plot is kind of interesting, and they do try to put some emotion in there. It doesn't really work all that well. But what really drops this movie down is the editing. The editing to this movie is just not good. It's a mess. It really, and that's a problem for the plot. That's a problem for the story. Is that it just constantly occurs throughout the story, and you're like, why is this here? It feels like it was meant for a different reason, and it just seems kind of shoved in there, or someone forgot to take that out. That happens a couple times in this movie, whereas something like The Whole Nine Yards, that doesn't happen. The story is just a lot more smoother, and that's why I give it that edge. I do put it above Treasure Island. Treasure Island did have some things I didn't love about it. I think the dialogue is kind of hard to get through, though it is genuine, and I can appreciate that they talk like people probably talked back in that day. It's kind of a hard thing to get through, but the story is not all that interesting. I feel like The Goonies is much more interesting as a plot. The Goonies, I feel like, has a more wholesome theme, and it does have a theme in there where Treasure Island is, the theme is not as wholesome and is kind of a drawn out movie. Just feel like The Goonies is a better package and has stood the test of time for a reason where Treasure Island hasn't stood up quite as well. That's all I've got for The Goonies. Kind of surprised to get it out so early. I know it's the 52nd movie, but I mean, this is a hard hitter for me. This is one of my favorites, one of my movies that I've watched as a kid and I really enjoyed. If you have not seen this movie, do yourself a favor and go watch it. It's a great movie. It's renowned for a reason. Please let me know what you think about this movie. If you have watched it later on as an adult and you watched it as a kid, tell me if you see those things that I saw. If you ever really realize kind of how much of a mess the movie really is in some sections. I love it when you guys comment. That's the whole point. I made this entire YouTube channel so that I could interact with you guys. So it really makes my day when I get to hear what you guys had to say. But otherwise, if you're interested in somebody who has the same format as me, then go check out my best friend Bosso Movie Reviews. He does the same thing where he ranks them in the same year, decade, and all time, except his list is bigger and he has done a lot more of these movies that are not in 2025. I've done a lot of 2024, 2025 movies trying to keep up with modern movies. He's done a lot of these movies that are later. I am trying to get to do more of those, but go check him out if you're interested. But please comment a movie that you want me to review. I'm going to slowly chop down that list, and I will get to your movie and subscribe to me so that you can watch me review your movie. But otherwise, I'm Mr. Majoritarian. Stay classy, San Diego.